Britain is at a crossroads. Reform UK, a party once dismissed as a pressure group, has surged in the polls, outpacing the Conservatives, even challenging Labour. But what does this mean for Nigel Farage's movement? For a moment, I was thinking of myself. You know, when you're in a hospital and the nurses come round and ask if you've moved today. I wasn't referring to that sort of movement. I'm bringing it down to the lowest common denominator, aren't I, really? Anyway, what does this mean for Nigel Farage's movement? The future of the Conservative Party or the wider political landscape, movements aside. For some time, I've argued that the most credible endgame for Reform UK is a merger with the Conservative Party, forming a more right-wing political concept, much like what happened in Canada during the 1990s. Yet despite growing speculation, Nigel Farage himself remains cautious about this, leaving open multiple scenarios for the future of the British right. And the historical precedent in Canada is compelling. In the 1990s, the Progressive Conservative Party found itself fragmented by the rise of the populist Reform Party, led by Preston Manning, and the Reform Party gained traction by capitalising on disillusion with the traditional right, particularly on issues like free trade and immigration, which should all sound very familiar. Initially, the two parties coexisted uneasily, dividing the right-wing vote and enabling liberal dominance. But by 2003, the two factions united under Stephen Harper, forming the modern Conservative Party of Canada. It took nearly a decade, but the trajectory was clear with hindsight. Disunity on the right led to electoral failure, which in turn necessitated consolidation. And could the UK be heading in the same direction, and will it take the same amount of time? The debate has intensified following the defection of Rael Braverman, husband of the former Home Secretary Suella Braverman, to Reform UK. And his departure has fueled speculation that his wife might follow suit, particularly as her Conservative leadership ambitions have withered to nothing. Yet Reform UK's ability to secure winnable seats remains a problem for her, because once you've been a high-flying MP, you don't want to join something which is a disaster. You don't want to be an Anne Widdecombe. And without a realistic shot at electoral success, Braverman risks irrelevance if she jumps ship too soon. And the intrigue has deepened because Rael Braverman has publicly declared today or yesterday on Twitter, in capital letters no less, that Reform UK must not merge with any party. Must not merge with any party. Goodness, we've had movements and margarine. Any minute now, it's going to be like Last Tango in Paris. The emphatic denial raises eyebrows. Why such forceful opposition to a merger, that at least on paper would strengthen the right? And his rhetoric hints not at a refusal to merge, but at conversations which are going on, quite high-powered conversations that are going on, that he wishes to silence. He wishes the rest of the world didn't know about this. That's what the message is. The message is quite clear. His post is an attempt to shore up the party's base, to ward off a premature pact, and to silence the debate. But it's not doing that, because when you hear people saying, there will not be a merger, you know there will be. You know it's on the cards. You know it's actively being discussed. And because the one thing politicians can't do is lie effectively when the lie would do them good. They lie a great deal over incidental things, over things which don't matter. But when it really matters, the lie is pathetic. And given the fractured state of the right-wing vote in Britain, there are therefore four things that could happen. First, Reform UK collapses into irrelevance, which is possible, but given its polling strength at the moment, I think it's unlikely. However, it's worth pointing out that the SDP in the 1980s, 1983, I think, was stronger than Reform UK is now. And it got no votes. It got no seats. The second possibility, the Conservative Party will be completely destroyed, which I think is highly likely, but that will not be the result of Reform UK. It's got nothing to do with the Reform UK's ardent supporters. History suggests that major parties rarely disappear overnight, but history has not had to contend with a series of dismal party leaders like Liz Truss and Kemi Badenoch. It will be a disaster! I'd go hard. What is this person doing? Even her slogans are pathetic. Brace! Brace! Third possibility is that Labour is eventually undone by its own internal contradictions. And while no party remains dominant forever, the current opposition lacks the ideological coherence to displace Labour. But could Labour collapse internally? Yes, that's a high possibility. Labour is a far more uneasy coalition than the Conservatives. And the fourth possibility is that Reform and the Conservatives could reach some form of understanding. That's the most probable outcome, and whether via a formal merger or a tactical electoral arrangement, such as existed in 2019, at the moment, of course, it's denied vigorously, but by the time we get to the next election, that may well be an option. Despite its strategic logic, a merger or a pact faces significant roadblocks. Firstly, Reform UK's base includes voters who view the Conservatives as irredeemably compromised, and conversely, there are many moderate Conservatives who see Reform as far too extreme. And this dynamic mirrors the tension within the US Republican Party, where establishment figures struggle to unify with Trump loyalists. Additionally, the UK's first-past-the-post system punishes divided political movements, and without coordination, the right risks perpetual defeat. A merger may be inevitable, but it will not be seamless, and it may not be efficacious. With a Labour landslide possible even in the next election, Reform UK has no incentive to negotiate with a wounded Conservative Party. Instead, Farage may aim to maximise his vote share, win a parliamentary representation that gets beyond single digits, and strengthens his bargaining position. That's a long game. That's the Canadian strategy. And Farage has undoubtedly got his eye on what Canada has been doing. However, Reform remains structurally weak, and it's going to take significantly more than 5 years to sort itself out. Farage has yet to sell his shares in the company controlling the party, raising questions about his long-term intentions. And if he envisaged Reform as a lasting force, he would be developing the necessary infrastructure. Instead, his actions suggest Reform is a bargaining chip, a vehicle for leveraging influence over the post-election right. So one area where Farage is vulnerable is the NHS. And while he claims to support its funding, past comments reveal a preference for private insurance-based healthcare models, and Reform UK figures like Rupert Lowe have openly advocated for a system resembling that of the US or of France, and this is deeply unpopular among Reform's older, economically precarious voter base. Labour would be wise to exploit this, exposing Reform's ideological inconsistencies and presenting Farage as a threat to the NHS. If Reform cannot reassure voters on healthcare, its ceiling will remain limited. Raoul Braverman's insistence that Reform will never merge may be posture rather than definition, and the historical precedent of the Canadian right suggests that division cannot endure indefinitely. And the Conservatives may resist a merger today, but post-election or even just pre-election, desperation could change their calculation. In the short term, Reform UK will continue its populist insurgency, but it should keep an eye on what happened in 1983, I think, with the SDP. Desperation is very much on the cards, and the real question is whether Reform is a genuine political alternative or merely a Trojan horse for remaking the Conservative Party in Farage's image. If history is any guide, the Farage Conservative Party scenario remains highly plausible. And for that, I suspect Farage would probably have to dump the majority of Reform UK. The Reform UK become the brown shirts of the Farage rise. But for the Tories, it may ultimately be their only path to survival, and I'm afraid Suella Braverman at least knows that. And so probably does Kemi Badenoch, and so does Priti Patel. These three individuals, I think, are well aware of this is the way the cookie crumbles, and this is the way the Conservative Party is heading. If it is to survive at all, the Conservative Party will morph into the party of Farage. I very much doubt, however, that it will morph into the Reform UK Party. That will be over. That will simply be a stepping stone for the career of Nigel Farage.